Yes, indeed, I'm back, ladies and gentlemen, and the rest of you. What have I been doing the last 3 months? Or maybe you didn't notice. Anyways, I went down the rabbit hole of cryptocurrencies, all the way from blockchain to the emerging metaverse. It's been an amazing, and sometimes even a bit bizarre exploration. For those of you who are unaware of it, over the past 10 years, an entire economic ecosystem has been emerging right under our noses. Now it's on the verge of bursting into the public consciousness. It's been one of the most fascinating journeys I've taken in a long time. But before I take you with me down that rabbit hole, I need to address the obvious. Why should you pay attention to me in the first place? I mean, it's a good question. I'm going to give you 6 good reasons for that. And I will be posting my first 3 videos on the crypto world, which will consist of part 1, a discussion on how blockchain technology could play a powerful role in my concept of technoanarchism, specifically what is called DeFi, or decentralized finance applications. This technology suggests the possibility of a completely decentralized financial system, and that alone could have enormous potential for human society in general. Then part 2, a brief survey of the crypto world, starting with blockchain, decentralized finance, NFTs, what they called decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs, all the way up to the emerging metaverse. That will be followed by part 3, which is an account of my own escapades into the crypto land, what brought me into full participation in the crypto space, and what I'm doing in it now, which will include tracking my investments and recommending the people you might want to follow for information regarding crypto, depending on your level of interest. From then on, I will continue to update whatever's going on in the crypto space in reference, of course, to how these technologies could be important to technoanarchism, especially in the development of what I'm calling non-oppressibility. And I can't help but mention, if you don't know much about the emerging world of crypto and the metaverse, you're going to be amazed, even if you don't care much for it or you're not interested in investing. Now, I knew a pretty good deal about Bitcoin before this, but I was not really interested in investing for a lot of reasons. I just wasn't. But I knew philosophically how important it was as far as decentralizing the banking system. However, I only saw it as a reserve currency, a new currency for that would disempower the bankers. But I didn't realize it's way more than that. What's happening now is way beyond that. Bitcoin is, of course, still a staple element, but it's not the central feature now. But really, even so, the real question is, why should you pay attention to my channel in the first place? It's a good question. Here are my reasons. First of all, I have a unique vantage point, my Cuban background. This is an enormous advantage. I have witnessed, along with my family, the real emergence of a communist system, and I've seen how it manifests. I can smell it a mile away. Secondly, I attained my PhD in the humanities late in life. I was in the very belly of the beast, the sewer that feeds the swamp. And with the advantage of my Cuban background, it was so obvious to me what was going on there. And equally obvious, how easily young minds fresh out of high school can be so easily duped. There are brilliant minds in the resistance now, not just like Tucker Carlson, but brilliant people among us here in the front lines, like my good friend Semyagog, others like Academic Agent, James Lindsay, New Discourses, plenty of people. But as I'm pointing out, I have something unique to offer, and I'll hopefully make that self-evident as we proceed. So here are the 6 critical points of advantage that you will be gaining from paying attention to my channel. Number 1, understanding who the adversary really is. What's actually at stake from someone whose family has seen it with their own eyes and experienced that loss. How complete it is and how the betrayal starts. But here in the US is foremost a simple dichotomy, the great American experiment versus global socialism. My conceptualization of technoanarchism is a continuation of the great American experiment. I want to make that clear. But I also need to make it clear that the Democratic Party of today is not trying to create a better America from a somewhat different perspective. That is not their objective. And it's time we look that fact square in the face and acknowledge that we are not dealing with a competitor, but with an adversary. In fact, we are dealing with an enemy. No borders, no wall, no USA at all. This is not a black pajama meme made up by university kids to shout at BLM riots or at the southern border. This is a central goal of the globalists, and the meme has been cultivated and circulated throughout the university system and from there into, now, all of our major institutions for the past 40 to 50 years. The Democratic Party is our enemy. It's the enemy of the great American experiment. We need to look that square in the face. What that entails and what that means for our own objectives and strategies is what I will continue to cover and continue to emphasize. Number 2, techno-anarchism as a potential antidote to the concentration of power, not just for this generation, but for generations to come. Techno-anarchism can be best understood as a set of practices and technologies that could preserve and expand the great American experiment, even if officially the United States were to become, at least in Washington, D.C., the United Socialist States of the North and Central American Economic Zone. This is what is already happening in Europe, under the smokescreen of the European Union, a so-called union that is increasingly not for the Europeans. The goal is not the unification of Europe. The European Union's goal is the dissolution and deconstruction of the European peoples and their wonderful culture in order to make room for a new, perverse economic zone that will consist of a goulash of people with no identity, no culture, no history outside of the identity provided them by the global socialist elites. And I will remind you and continue to remind you that all socialism manifests as fascism. The objective of the techno-anarchist resistance is to manifest the principles of non-oppressibility, a practical solution to the centralization of power. Non-oppressibility is a form of perpetual resistance. We, the people, will make the price of oppression not worth the perceived benefits that the oppressor anticipates. Number 3, how the new blockchain technologies might play a central role in the resistance to the perverse psychopathic globalist project. Number 4, the concept that ideology itself, contrary to what has been the general historical consensus, is not an intellectual and social benefit, but rather ideologies are actually themselves mental, emotional, and spiritual diseases, chief among them being socialism. The great American experiment was an experiment in practice, in pragmaticism. It was a practical solution to the concentration of power, not an ideological. And I've talked about that before. The closest thing to ideology that the founding fathers were, inspired by was actually Christian morality. But that's a whole other discussion. I've already covered it many times, but we'll continue to reiterate it. Now back to ideology. We are asked, commanded, to displace our experience of reality with the expected experience of the ideology, with the ideological representation of reality. We are then compelled by force and intimidation to pretend that we experienced a political ideological narrative about reality rather than our own real experiences. This is, of course, impossible, but the insistence on this false experience inevitably leads to massive human catastrophes. As the great lies become more and more obvious, the globalists have to deploy more and more censorship, more and more oppression, more and more mass incarceration, and eventually the inevitable outcome of all socialism, genocide to one magnitude or another. But also, the insistence by the hierarchy that we actually experience their false reality cannot be construed as anything less than an attempt to induce mass insanity. This kind of mass insanity project is only made possible by the introduction into the public body of an ideological pathogen, an ideological construct that acts as a short circuit to the society's ability to apprehend reality and, by extension, its own good. Socialism is at war with reality. Socialism seeks to normalize and institutionalize insanity. By making the society ill, the globalist maniacs think society becomes ripe for deconstruction, ripe for re-engineering. The re-engineering of a population requires absolute power, concentrated in the fewest possible hands. It can never be accomplished by any kind of consensus or by any other means. I've already said this many times, and I'll continue to emphasize it. No pharaoh, no khan, no emperor, no king ever held the concentrated power of a socialist dictator or a socialist party. Never. All socialism must, always has, and does right now manifest as fascism. And I've covered that. All you have to do is look at China. It's a national socialist state. It's a Nazi state. Remember, Nazi doesn't say anything about white people. National Socialism. Socialism is and always has been an engineering project in which we, the people, are the guinea pigs for a tiny, far less than 1% of the population. Number 5, yes, blockchain technologies could play a critical role in the decentralization of our financial system, and with that, the decentralization of power itself. But also, it could make, as I said, the falsification of reality, which is central to the globalist project, nearly impossible, or at least sufficiently difficult to collapse the project before global fascism can be instituted. Globalism requires a postmodern premise, a premise that assumes that truth and propaganda are completely interchangeable, and that reality itself is nothing more than a generated narrative. Yet, in a fascinating twist, the relationship between truth, reality, and falsification is actually built into the consensus protocols of all decentralized blockchains. Not deliberately in any intellectual or ideological sense, but as a default position in order for the blockchain to function at all. The potential implications are truly provocative. Now, I am not one for panaceas and quick fixes, but the potential implications of blockchain technologies are, if nothing else, provocative and worth exploring. But what about the metaverse, you might ask? Isn't that a false, or at the very least a substitute reality? Not really, any more than a game is a false reality. And with that, I think you're going to see gaming itself in a new light. We're going to explore these relationships: blockchain, decentralized finance, or DeFi, autonomous decentralized organizations, or DAOs, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, the metaverse, gaming theory, and of course, technoanarchism. I can assure you, it's going to be interesting. And last but not least, number 6, maybe even the most important element of all, I will continue to emphasize and expound upon the central role that the varieties of the religious or ecstatic experience plays in the emergence and continuation of human culture. And in that respect, to any formulation of technoanarchism as well. Any resistance movement must be grounded in culture. Culture generates values and continuity. Without a spiritual center, there is no human culture. And as a result, there is no human society, no human continuity. The ecstatic experience is rooted in the human body. It is the primary vehicle through which we evolve and seek to apprehend reality at the deepest levels. And there's a scientific premise for this that I'll be exploring. It's called biogenetic structuralism. I began that exposition with my Into the Forest series that dealt with the American Great Awakenings, and I will continue that track as well. I will endeavor to explain how it is that the varieties of the ecstatic experience are what has driven the arts and sciences throughout human history. Don't believe me? Okay, but I think by the end of the series, you'll at least be questioning the possibility that I could be right. It was through the work of my doctoral dissertation in music and ritual that led me to this realization, and this concept will continue to be central to all my presentations. Who knows, you might look at religion, or at least the varieties of the ecstatic experience, which is the root of all religion, in a new light, so to speak. So in summary, I hope that for the reasons I just covered, you feel that it is not only well worth your time to pay careful attention to yours truly, the Jolly Scholar 888, I hope you will feel compelled and enjoy the ride. So stay tuned for my next video, which I will ask a fundamental question. Could blockchain, cryptocurrency, decentralized finance, and the emerging metaverse be among the most radical changes in human civilization since the American Revolution and the Industrial Revolution? Hashtag defund the universities, starve them out.